morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here. I am very aware that we are the first act of the day, and everyone had a great time at karaoke. I definitely saw that in the room. I see a lot of people still have voices, though, so this is something that's absolutely not allowed. That's what you're not allowed to have after the party. So very happy to be here today with Lethabo Motsoaledi, the CTO and co-founder of Voyc. So let's start the conversation about the founder journey from a little bit of the background. Let's say the very start of the journey. So, like, what's your original background? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? So how did it all lead to you becoming an entrepreneur?
Great, very loaded question to start off with. First of all, thanks everyone for being here so early in the morning. I appreciate it if you're late at the party last night. That's not why my voice is gone. Just so excited to be here. But yeah, just around, you might hear from my accent, I'm not from here, also not from Europe. I'm originally from South Africa, from Cape Town. If you haven't been, put it on your bucket list. But yeah, I was born in Cape Town, and within the South African context, how my journey led to me being an entrepreneur is a lot of people might not know this, but South Africa is a very, wouldn't call it a developing state. It's pretty developed and well off, but there's a lot of socioeconomic divide. So growing up, you pretty much have to decide, like most cases, are you going to be a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, or something very frontline? On the other side, you decide, are you going to be a politician? It's like very, very like polar in terms of where your impact drives you. So I came from a family of full-on doctors. If it's not my dad, it's my uncle who married a doctor, then my sister, then a whole bunch of doctors. And I was just looking at the work that they did day in and day out, and I'm like, this is just not scalable. Like, you show up to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, you leave at 6 p.m. sometimes, and you've probably only helped like 5 or 6 people. And I just didn't see that scale. So I was like, that's not going to be for me. And on the other side, I had a whole bunch of politicians as well in my family trying to make an impact that way. And I'm like, I can't believe when you see a problem that it might be maybe 2, 3, 4 years before the policy needs to be put in place and you can make an impact. So I was like, that's not going to work for me. That also doesn't make any sense, because if you see a problem, hopefully you can solve it immediately. And so when I was around 15, I read Richard Branson's book, which if you guys don't know, the name seems rude for a 15-year-old to read, but it was about entrepreneurship. It's called Losing My Virginity. And it was just around how Richard Branson built Virgin and Virgin Records and all of that. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is incredible that someone can just see a problem and say, I'm going to take on this industry, whether I'm experienced about it or not. So I'm like, that's exactly what I want to be. So it was the first time I understood what entrepreneurship meant. And for the next 3 years of my life, from like 15 to 18, I kept trying to tell my parents I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And they were like, yeah, that's a good idea, but entrepreneurs have businesses, problems to solve. And so the rest of my journey became about finding the problem I would be most passionate about solving, that I could influence the most.
Right. So you were after big impact and quickly.
That was what I was chasing. What's going to make an impact? And I think later we'll chat about some of the businesses that I'd started that didn't scale, and the reason why I stopped them immediately was like, this is not going to scale. It's not going to have the impact that I wanted to have. So immediately, like, closed it down and iterated onto the next one.
And to go on a very quick tangent, so in general, by now, do you think it has worked? Do you think it has worked out the way that you wanted?
Yeah, I think it's worked out. We have a company that's been running for about six and a bit years, growing team, growing customer base, growing impact. I know we'll touch on it just a little bit later. But yeah, wait, actually, I can touch on it now. So today, what we do, I run a company called Voyc, spelled VOYC, for Voice of Your Customer. And what we do is we do conversation monitoring for compliance of financial services. So if you've called a call center before and you've heard them say, this call is recorded for quality and training, what many people don't know is that there is a team of people that try to manually listen to all the calls, but they only listen to about 2%. So our AI system automatically integrates with a bank or financial services call center. We record pick up all the recorded conversations, and then we analyze for compliance. So if the agent was not compliant, if they missold to the customer was vulnerable, so couldn't exactly agree to all the things that were sold to them, our system would flag that, and then we feed that back into the loop so that someone can pick up that interaction. And to date, we've done around 38 million calls monitored, growing at around 2 million calls a month, which means that that's how many people we've impacted. So within a short span, 38 million plus minus people have been impacted or touched by our software, which I think is scalable.
Yeah. So do you analyze basically the transcription of the call, or is it a sentiment analysis, or is it both? Do you analyze the voice itself? How does it work?
So it's a number of different things, tiered analysis that we do. So the first thing is, as soon as the conversation comes in, we also do emails and chats, but we first transcribe the call if it's audio, and once it's been transcribed, there's a number of different processes that go in. We'll track whether there's any silence within the interactions. We do sentiment as well. We monitor emotion. But the most important thing that we try to track via different algorithms and methods is customer outcome. So even if the agent followed the entire script, we score them on that. Did the customer get the right outcome? So if you called trying to cancel your insurance, did you actually succeed in canceling your insurance? And if not, the customer or the company, our customer, has to account to the regulator, why didn't this customer get the right outcome? And so, number of different processes there.
So now let's go to the time frame between this and the 15-year-old you. So what's happened? What's happened in this intervening time? You went to the university to study what? Yeah,
so I went to university. I studied a very random degree. I studied geomatics engineering, which is the study of precise earth measurement. And the whole idea of studying engineering is I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't know what business to start, and I figured entrepreneurs solve problems. So go and study something that helps you to problem solve. And so I picked up a random engineering degree that I thought at the time wouldn't force me to spend like hours and hours studying. That wasn't true. All engineering, I think, is hard. So I studied geomatics engineering, and during that whole process, I met my co-founder who was like, he also wants to be an entrepreneur. And I was like, that's quite interesting. What is it that you're building? And that was our first trap. I would say, if you're doing any engineering, obviously investors, other founders, other business leaders really appreciate, not that all other degrees aren't amazing, but they appreciate the ability to problem solve. That's one thing. So I got to my first year of engineering, and I was like, I looked at my lecturer who's wearing land surveying boots. I don't know if you guys are familiar with land surveying, but she had like a safety vest on. She had like land surveying boots. She had like really hectic attire. And I'm like, that will never be me. Like, I am never going to work here a day in my life, but I have to finish this degree. And so I did. And during that degree, we met our university professor who forced us to program everything. So if an assignment, even if it was an essay, try to fit some programming into it, which was really useful, really helpful, because if it weren't for him, I don't think I would have left knowing how to code or knowing how to program. And so that eventually led me to our first, or as soon as it was time to graduate, my co-founder and I were like, obviously you have to do some internships. I interned at a company called Procter & Gamble. I would show up at 7 a.m. in the morning at that internship, and people showed up at like 10, 11. And then I was also then told in my internship year that if you want to progress in this career, you have to spend 3 years at this level, band 1, you have to spend another 3 years at band 2, then like so forth. And I'm like, it would take me like 14 years to get to like, or 14 or 15 years to get to like any level close to executive. And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't scale either, so I'm just never going to have a real job. I'm going to try build my own levels, yeah.
And that's how it has happened. You haven't ever been in employment, right?
No, I've never had a real job. But the work I do is quite difficult, important, but never actually got the experience of working in a corporate environment, which I think is a good thing, because we serve financial services. So this is, again, if you're an entrepreneur taking on a very difficult industry, that is definitely your advantage. So if you're taking on the energy space and you've never worked in energy, I argue that that's your advantage because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. That naivety is actually an advantage because you go in and you pick up the problem from the way you see it, whereas people that are in an industry, particularly financial services, it's so scary how backwards they are or how archaic things are, and people just accept that things are like this because this is how they've always been. And coming as an outsider, you're definitely naive, but that's definitely your biggest strength because you can say, it doesn't make sense for it to work this way or for it to look this way, and then you just impact that. And I honestly, if anyone, even investors or even the customers, argue that, like, what's your experience in this, spin it around and say, my experience is actually never having been here, which is an advantage you don't have. I've seen the problem, or I'm looking at the problem from a completely different angle, which is a superpower that most people don't count as much as I think they should.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And what was your first company? So so uni, internships, no job after that, and then you founded.
Yeah. So the first company was first few actually. We iterate. I think we went through like 5 or 4.5, depending if you count a registered business as a real company. But we started off with 3D printing. So my co-founder and I realized that, geez, at 2015, if everybody has a 3D printer in their house, like what amazing things could we all do and build?
Yeah, that was a great time, the time of great hope.
Yeah, it was a time of great hope for 3D printing, if you remember that time. So we managed to secure a license from a company called T-Forge in China to be the sole distributor of 3D printers in South Africa. But then we had a problem that, like, we had this distributing license, but we had no one to distribute the licenses to. So we're like, well, if we sold them to schools, that would be amazing. And then schools were like, but we don't control our budget. Like, it'd be very irresponsible for us to like sell or buy 3D printers for our students without approval from government. So we're like, okay, let's get corporates as CSI to buy 3D printers and donate them to schools. So we went to corporates trying to sell them 3D printers, and they were like, this is not part of our CSI strategy. So then we pivoted and said, what if we sold art to corporates?
Okay.
And then the art pieces can fund, or the sale of the art piece can fund buying 3D printers that we can donate to schools.
The chain is getting longer and longer here.
The chain just got longer and longer. And what we ended up doing is building a 2.5 meter tall 3D printed statue, hourglass of Nelson Mandela, which is very interesting. And the idea was every year on his birthday, South Africa has what we call Nelson Mandela Day. So we could call this hourglass, it would activate, and there were exactly 67 minutes of sand that would flow through this hourglass. And all the corporates would celebrate this national volunteering day all at once. And it was very interesting because we had to sell, to make it us break even, we had to sell that art piece for 10,000 euros, and it cost us 9,500 euros to make. And that was our first business. We sold 3. And of those 3, so very, very good thing to sell, but very unfortunate because the corporates didn't actually collect them. And that means that it was a pity sale. They just felt sorry for us. That's why they bought them. And then the next business, eventually we closed that down. We're like, great, we sold 30,000 euros worth of something, but we only made 1,500 euros, so this doesn't make sense. Let's move on to the next business. Still using 3D printers. We decided that we're going to 3D print ultrasounds. So when expectant moms, don't know how many people know about this process, but when a woman is pregnant, she goes for normal 2D scans, but now there's a 3D version of a scan where you can actually see the baby in 3D. Now we're like, how cool would it be if you could print that ultrasound scan? Because everybody looks at an ultrasound and they're like, don't want to say it, but this thing is really ugly. So never call anyone's baby ugly, but we thought a 3D version of that might be better because you can actually see the features in the face. And so we were like, this is fantastic. We launched on Facebook. A lot of people, we got 2,000, 3,000 likes on our first post. We got a lot of partnerships from brands like Pampers and Huggies. So we thought this would be amazing. We even went on national TV as really innovative new business. Launch on our first day, and not a single person bought. 2 months later, not a single person bought this product. And we're like, what's going on? And it just turned out that as much as the product was for expectant moms, our customer was actually doctors. So an expectant mom would always go to a doctor to be like, hey, there's this new product I want to buy. And the doctor would be like, I've never heard about this company, and I've never, 3D printing or 3D scans are a luxury. You don't have to do it. So our sale was dying in the doctor's room before we could even get to the customer. And so that's the first thing. Obviously, if you're going to build anything, talk to your customers first and figure out who your real distributing partner is. So what's more important, I think, thinking back now, is distribution is almost as important as product development. And that's something we learned a little bit too late, because most of us just focus on the product and we think if it's perfect, people will just come flocking, and that never happens. I think 50% of your time must be spent on distribution and 50% of your time on product development. That's really what's going to help you get to the right product market fit.
Right. So those were the ultrasounds, and then so that. Did you end up changing something, or did you just
No, we just dropped it immediately. We're like, obviously this doesn't work, this doesn't scale. First of all, none of us, we can't even empathize with the customer, because first my co-founder is male and I was just recently graduated. So it's not even like any of us could even empathize with who our customer is and what they wanted. So there was no empathy on that regard. I'm like, well, we're just gonna shut it down and try the next thing. And that's when we learned about design thinking or user-centered design. And we're like, that makes sense. We've been approaching this from a completely engineering mindset. Build something and your customers will come, which is definitely never true. You have to build whatever you're building with your customer. So we're like, surely if we started a user thinking, user design agency, we can help other companies also talk to customers or work through this problem we never had. So that's when we started an agency that did design thinking. And that was the precursor to voice. So we ended up with a project where we had about 30 hours of recorded conversation and about a weekend to analyze all of it. And that was around 2016, 17. And we thought there's no way that there's no software to automatically analyze conversations. Like, how are people still listening to 30 hours of interviews in this day and age? And so that's when we learned that, hey, if we just connected our audio to a couple of APIs to transcribe them and then worked through our own natural language processing algorithm, we could speed up our analysis process, analyze these conversations, and then really have quick insights. And that was what we call V1 of voice, which is why it was like standing for voice of your customer, where you could, if you give us any conversations that you had with your customer, we'd analyze those and then tell you what the customer really wants.
Right. And so as you started building voice, did you try to, let's say, keep in mind all the mistakes that you made with the previous companies? Were there any particular sort of lessons? Was there a list? Okay, we're not going to do this, this, and this again.
Yeah. So the first thing is we're not building anything without customer validation. So we would actually, if you're in the luxury of doing this, if you're in early stage, sit with your potential customer and actually ask them, can I build and test this with you? So our first, the first thing, that was the first thing. The second thing was to get our first round of investment, which is always important. Investors today will tell you this, is obviously the best source of funding is from your customer. So we got a couple of customers, 5, that had experienced conversation analysis as the biggest pain point. And we asked them, will you pay us to build this for you, right? So that was our first sources of revenue. We didn't even have a product yet, but we asked our customers to pay us to build this. And to prove that we were doing the work, we asked, can we sit in your office? So I argue that was a corporate job, because I had to sit in a huge 2,500 agent call center that has 5,000 people working for it. Can we sit and build the solution for you? Which meant that anytime they had a break, we would sit with the QA manager and say, hey, we have an idea to build this. Can we give us feedback on this? So we iterated so quickly on something we definitely we knew the customer wanted, and they were paying us for it at that moment. So mistakes of will they pay for it is definitely out the window, because they are paying for it. And that's what I also argue, that if you're in an industry that requires you to do proof of values or proof of concepts, always make sure they pay you upfront. Find a way to make sure they pay you upfront. And if they refuse to pay you upfront, they don't. It's arguable that they're not experiencing the pain as much as you'd like to think they are. So that's your number one signal. Are they willing to pay upfront, and get them to pay upfront?
Right.
That was the biggest learning.
And that was still in South Africa then?
That was still in South Africa. That was around 2018, before we made the jump to Berlin and to essentially the Netherlands after that. But yeah.
Right. So what brought you to Europe then? Why did you decide to make the change?
Yeah, so also quite important, which is why conferences like this make a big impact. It's very important that you're spending as much time with a customer as you are with your team, but also with other founders that are experiencing the same problem. So we wanted to be learning from other founders who are also in the B2B SaaS space to figure out some problems that they're having with enterprise sales, distribution, go-to-market. So we were on a Techstars program in Berlin for 10 weeks. And we realized, okay, first of all, Europe is where we need to move our business to, because that's where our customers primarily were. That was when the UK was still in Europe, and they no longer are. But
geographically, they haven't drifted anywhere. It's
they
fine.
never left. But it was still when the UK was in Europe that we decided to move to Europe, to the Netherlands to be precise, knowing that our customer base is going to be in the UK, because our systems and our technology, again, for scale, we can process other languages, but our team was primarily English speaking. So we chose to focus on only English speaking markets, which meant UK, US, Australia, and still a little bit of South Africa. So that's why we moved over to be around like-minded founders, spending time with potential investors, potential customers, and other founders that actually are solving not the exact same problem, but experience the same issues as we do. Yeah.
And so you started building a much more distributed team than before, I suppose.
Correct, yeah. So our team is 66% sitting in South Africa. If you can do something like that, that makes a lot of sense, because our engineering capacity, it's a lot cheaper in South Africa, but our go-to-market is here in Europe, because it makes sense to be closer to the customer with the go-to-market team.
Right. And so how did it work for you building? So first of all, I think this was probably the moment when you moved from this aspiring founder kind of phase, that you start something and then you basically throw the spaghetti at the wall and then it doesn't stick and then you start all over again. But here you feel that this is it, we're going to build this further. So was there a shift of mentality at that point? Did you start thinking differently?
Yeah, there were a lot of different shifts that happened that helped us on our journey to what we would call product market fit. Because the first part, you're still trying to figure out what it is that you're doing, who does an impact. There were a couple of signals that we picked up. One, the UK started talking about regulating all financial services conversations. So just that signal, I know a lot of, to our credit or discredit, a lot of investors also, which is why 50% listen, 50% don't, talk about being worried about companies that are built around regulation. If you are in energy, in finance, whatever, and regulation is a thing, lean in very heavily on it, because what happened was the UK regulator started saying, if you're doing anything in financial services and you have any customers that potentially have vulnerabilities, you have to prove that you've done something to serve them differently. Just that piece of law implied that if you are doing any customer conversations, you have to monitor 100%. Because how can you then know that you've treated every vulnerable customer correctly? How do you even know if you had a vulnerable customer? So regulation implied that 100% monitoring was necessary, which is also why we doubled down on financial services, because there was a law that made us necessary. So that was the first thing. And then after that, talking to different customers, we started to pick up, or potential customers, that they actually don't have any solution in place. And so we went to customers. We also went to the regulator. The regulator is not allowed to endorse companies, but they can say, we strongly recommend. And we just got the regulator to say, we strongly recommend you use technology. They didn't say us, but we used that as a premise to our customers, and then that was when we first thought, okay, this is really something that can grow and scale.
Now,
Yep.
yeah, this is great. And though I know that you also pay a lot of attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion questions in your team. And so, as you were building a newly distributed team, how did you approach this?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. And I will say that to any founders or any team members or companies like building a team, it is very true that like potential employees look at your team makeup and look up and decide, am I going to fit in this organization? Obviously, I say this coming from Africa into Europe, and I look at it and I'm like, it makes sense for it to have a certain demographic because we're in a different region, but it doesn't make sense if you're like a team and it's completely all male, and you'll be wondering, where are all the girls? Why are they not applying? Maybe they don't exist. And it's because we discovered, of course, I should have known this because I'm female, but women approach jobs and opportunities way different to what how men do. So the lesson that we had was that as we were starting to hire for developers, and we were starting to hire for support, whatever we were hiring for, the typical lingo in startups is we're high impact, high growth, we're growing really fast, we're scaling really fast. If you've heard those words and you're like, yeah, that's the words that we use to describe our startup, 100% you're just inviting men to join your organization, because women don't describe themselves, and maybe they should, but it's a fact of society, as high impact, high growth, fast scaling, intense environments. Those words don't particularly resonate well. So what we learned is, even if we were looking for the same job spec, we changed the wording to sort of figure out what would attract female developers a lot better than would attract male developers. We adjusted our words in the job spec. So if you know there's 10 requirements, guys would like meet 3 out of 10 requirements and still apply, whereas a woman would meet 7 out of 10 requirements and not apply. So we were like, if you meet any of these requirements and you think you can make an impact, you like basically adjusting the wording of our application allowed us to get a lot more female applicants than male applicants. And today we've got 50-50 parity in our split. But a few years ago, it wasn't the case. So I will say that if you're struggling with DEI, or you're struggling with making sure that you've got the right balance of team members, try and do that. Look at the wording you're using to invite other people, and try question, is this wording reflective of the type of organization I'm trying to build? And does the actual team makeup also reflect the type of organization I'm trying to build? And do I use the right inviting words to make sure that I'm welcoming different people and different perspectives? So I also argue that if you are not diverse and you're looking to be diverse, try use words like, we're really looking for someone with a different perspective. So if you think you have a different perspective, please apply and join this job. And then you'll see that you'll have a lot more different people coming onto your application process. And obviously, it doesn't change the quality of your applicants, it just changes the diversity of your application pool.
Great. It's really interesting. So I'm listening to you now, and I can feel that over these years, through this founder journey, the role, the day-to-day that you do as a founder has changed dramatically. Can you reflect on that? Basically, what were you doing at the beginning, what are you doing now? How has it been changing?
Yeah, so I think my favorite quote, whether you like him or not, about what it's like being a founder or building a business, Elon Musk said it's like staring in like the ether and chewing on glass. Like just staring in darkness, it's just painful and lonely and tricky. Luckily, I have a co-founder that experiences this with me. But in the beginning, it was about fixing any piece of code that broke, fixing any support queries, like talking to customers, doing all of that. Today, what's changed is, even if I'm a co-founder and CTO, my role is very much around career progression. My role is very much around like company organization structure. That's because we don't have a head of people yet. So it's very much around, are people in the right place doing the right things, so that I can then focus on the different problems that people don't want to solve. I'm still chief data protection officer as well, so that's something we can't hire someone for. I still look at contracts because we can't yet hire a legal team. But it's mainly trying to make sure that the right people are in the right positions, doing the repeatable things, so that I can focus on the things that can't scale yet or that nobody else can look at and solve.
Do you think if the 15-year-old you reading Losing My Virginity knew that this is what it would come to, would she be happy?
Yeah, I think so. I think so because if the question is, if I'd known how tricky being a founder is, would I still be a founder today? I think so because my inspiration in that entire book, Richard Branson, talks about all the times shit hit the fan. And that's what attracted me to the idea of entrepreneurship. It's like, hey guys, I woke up, shit hit the fan sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. But shit hit the fan in this way, and this is what I did to solve it. And I thought, how exciting, because every day you wake up and it's a different problem and a different opportunity. And I think because of that, 15-year-old me would be like, yeah, this is exactly what we signed up for. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think this is a great point to leave it at. We don't have any time left for this session. Thanks everyone for coming. Lethabo, thank you so much for sharing this journey with us, and good luck with everything that you do with Voice.
Yeah, thanks, Andrii. Thanks, everyone.